This video is going to cover the basics of perspective drawing, and I'm going to do a little demo of a perspective drawing in an interior space. The kind of principles of this topic are covered in Francis Ching's Architectural Graphics. It's a great book describing various drawing types, talks about different techniques. He has a lot of really great information in here, covers different tools, different ways that we draw, both kind of drawing from objective objective view versus perspective. So drawing something in axonometric or isometric view versus perspective, right? Where isometric view has parallel lines, perspectives are as your eye perceives them. So this topic is an important one in architecture, as we're constantly conveying ideas and translating those ideas into drawings. And the way that we communicate graphically has a lot to do with the actual designs that we work on. So this chapter 6 on perspective drawings, he discusses the distinction between linear perspective and drawing from this kind of idea of a parallel line drawing, and how perspectives are different, and they're not objective reality. These are more about optical reality. So how your eye perceives the object, and seeing vanishing points, seeing perspective distortion in an image rather than just depicting it according to a parallel line drawing. So this lecture is going to cover how to create a perspective, and this is a great diagram indicating kind of how the eye is perceiving an object and how it's being drawn as if projected onto this plane. So this is a great way to think of any drawing from eye level, because we're establishing the horizon line, we're establishing vanishing points, and how this object is going to be projected onto a flat plane of our piece of paper. So you can see that concept of horizon line here. You can see the horizon line, the vanishing point. This is in 1-point perspective, because there's 1 point here. Further on in the book, he talks about the difference between 1-point perspective, 2-point, and 3-point, where 1 point is seen here, where you're kind of looking at an object at its face, and you're able to see all of the vanishing lines kind of receding to one infinite point on the horizon. Whereas 2-point perspective, this has 2 vanishing points in the scene. So if you're looking at the corner of a cube, you'd see how the edges recede to 2 points. 3-point perspective is common when you're drawing a skyscraper, or you're looking at a tall building, and it's clear that the building is vanished. There's a vanishing point in the Z direction as well. So this is also a compelling drawing type. And there's a lot of rules as far as setting up grids. We're not going to go too deep into this today, but it's important to understand the principles of perspective when doing any drawing, because we're not just drawing this with rulers and making a measured drawing. We're actually drawing based on what our eye tells us. So we're gathering information and communicating that on paper. And when we do that, you constantly want to be making sure that you're drawing what you're seeing and not what your brain thinks you're seeing, because you have a mental image of that object in your mind, and you want to constantly fight that urge to just draw what your mental image is constructing, right? You want to depict reality as it is. If you're drawing something from observation, you want to make sure that whatever imperfections it has, you're documenting onto the paper. So that's sometimes the hardest thing to fight, is your own mind kind of telling you that an object is perfect or it's viewed in a specific way, when in reality it has imperfections. Maybe it's smaller in the perspective than it is in your mind. So we use a lot of reference lines, and we're constantly thinking about scale and proportion when doing these drawings. Often you'll see artists and architects use their pencil as a means for kind of capturing the length of something in reality, and then looking down on their paper and then keeping that same kind of scale and proportion so that things can be proportional when they're drawing them. So there's a lot of techniques that drawing is like any other muscle memory skill, where the more you do it, the better you'll get. This is an important distinction. A lot of people think people are naturally gifted at drawing, but it just takes repetition and kind of the discipline to keep going, drawing every day, keeping a sketchbook with you. Some tools I like to use, this is just a mechanical pencil. These are Micron pens. Very, very good at kind of creating ink lines, and I like to do a sketch in pencil and then line it with ink. I like to use a Moleskine sketchbook. It's just convenient to document thoughts, everything from a grocery list to taking meeting minutes and taking notes on a Zoom call, or taking writing ideas down for a project and starting the schematic design process. The sketchbook that I'm going to be using today is a Strathmore sketch. It's larger. This is 11 by 14. So I'm going to be using this to draw the perspective today. Okay, so the view that we're going to be working on is a perspective taken from Union Station in downtown Los Angeles. And this perspective is about at eye level. It's in the kind of main entry. There's this large room with chandeliers. The first thing that we do is establish the horizon line. So this is the line at eye level. We want to make sure that that's accurate, because that's going to be where our vanishing point is. In 1 point perspective, this will be really in the center of the image. The next thing I did was kind of establish the vertical here, and making sure that the ridge of this ridge beam aligns with the center of my horizon line and the center of my vanishing point here. Okay, so from there, it's a matter of understanding kind of the location of all of these. So I'm using construction lines to create all of these diagonals. The things that I'm doing are really establishing the proportion of the page. So I want to understand how much of the page should be dedicated to this wall, the far wall, and the wall to the left. And it's approximately symmetrical, so keeping those approximately the same. And again, using these construction lines to establish the perspective and kind of the angle of this wall, angle of that. So the first thing I did after the horizon line is establish the locations of the walls. Where the bottom, top, what does this rake wall look like? How high is that pitch? And establish this walkway on the floor too. So those were all kind of construction lines that I did. Moving forward in the drawing, it's about kind of getting the massing and scale right first, understanding proportion, and then as the drawing progresses, then you're adding detail kind of in layers to the drawing. So it's a matter of slowly adding detail rather than kind of starting on one corner of it and working your way through the whole project. You want to get the massing right, because if something is off, now you've spent a lot of time detailing something that is in the wrong location or proportionally is off. So try to get the massing first, get the proportion right, and use as many construction lines as you need. That's an important aspect of any drawing, is using these perspective lines. Okay, so having kind of established the massing of everything in the wall, I've also started drawing the window locations. You'll notice, the technique that I was doing is I was kind of realizing, okay, the center between these two, the midpoint, that's approximately where the edge of this window is. Okay, so use proportion on the image or whatever subject matter you're looking at. Try to grab the proportions of that when you're getting it onto paper. So understanding that's the center, and by that I mean center from here to here. Establish that, okay, that's the edge of my window, and so that means this window is going to be approximately this size. The next window, because it's receding in space, is going to get smaller. So that's another really important topic to understand, is as things recede in space, in perspectival space, they're going to diminish. There's going to be some perspective distortion there. So make sure to keep that in mind, right? So this distance between edge of window and edge of window is now getting smaller. And if there was a window here, it would be even more thin. So understanding how objects scale in space is a really important thing as well. In the Francis Ching book, he draws grid lines to kind of establish the sense of scale. And so if these were tiles, right, they would be larger in the foreground and kind of get smaller as they recede back into space here. So we're not really drawing that here, but it's good to understand. So we can keep going with this drawing. I got the walls started with these beams. We'll continue with the joists and windows, adding furniture and people towards the end. So that's the approach that we're going to take here. So as I draw these construction lines, I want to make sure that they're always emanating out from the vanishing point here. And again, I'm constantly looking up at the image to make sure that this is proportional. So there's one there, and there's one in between them. So it's important to set this up, and even if this doesn't end up being the final line, it's a kind of a reference point that we can use. And there's actually some foreground up here. And the same thing on the other side. So I could take pretty much the mirror image of this point and then use that to connect these. Next point is about here. A great bit of advice that I got from Graham Moreland at USC. He's famous for his hand drawings and beautiful perspectives, and and looking at one of my drawings, I said, yeah, I didn't get this thing right, and I kind of missed this. He said, yeah, you can't win them all. And I thought, that's great advice. In drawing and in life, we have to be perfectionists in this profession, but we also recognize that, this is still not reality. This is a perspective drawing. So here we have this beam that runs parallel to the wall. All these run parallel to the wall, but this one ends up being in the top left corner. And the more you do this, the better you'll get, just at kind of understanding proportion and scale. And I'm using light lines so that erasing is easy. There's the edge of wall. Here's the line for this beam, hitting the exact corner pretty much. This edge comes in like that. Let's see. This is somewhere between those two lines, actually. So we'll erase that first one. I can erase all of these lines. They don't really mean anything down here. And so from there, it's really just about adding detail to this image, trying to get the proportions right. And always just keep in the back of your mind, like, draw what you see, not what you think you see. So I'm constantly looking back up at the image to make sure that I'm doing just that. That window kind of stops here, and this is the solid portion of it. So often, with line weights, we want to have thicker line weights for things that are closer to the eye, and more thin line weights the further things recede. It helps give a little bit more realism to the image. Of course, I haven't drawn any of the furniture here. All of these stanchions would need to be drawn. Again, these are all just construction lines, so I need to make sure that I'm giving each of these joists the proper thickness when I'm drawing them, and that they're ending in the proper place. And so I could also continue adding detail with pencil, or I could make the transition to ink at any point. So understanding that there's this ribbon here that's just above eye level. That ribbon continues. Then there's also this entry to the rest of the station in the back here. So we want to get the height of this correct. We're just above these. So if eye level is here, yeah, that seems about right. This is approximately horizontal here. That should be the same height. Columns. And kind of massing out the furniture here. There's some seating. Again, follow the perspective. And figuring out kind of where this line is. Looking at that, they kind of come out to just past the edge of this window, so about here. So again, I'm using these construction lines to kind of establish proportion and figure out where that seating needs to be. And then on the left, they continue all the way across. So I'm going to count the number of stanchions here. And then drawing people, there's always a lot of interpretation there. We want to make sure eye level is at this level of the vanishing point. And, you know, as architects, we often do quick doodles for people. So it's, you know, even if this were, you know, maybe a design drawing, I would add more people in the foreground. And when you add people to a scene, you want to make sure that eye level is consistent throughout the image. So if someone was standing a lot closer, right, their head would be here, and you know, this would be kind of a silhouette of them. So the eye level would be continuous, whether they're far away or close. It's just the size of the person that's changing. And again, you can use perspective lines for that too, to establish, okay, that's the height of a person. I'm going to use that same logic and kind of scaling people accordingly, whether they're this large or further back in the distance. You can use that horizon line and vanishing point to establish various heights. Okay, and so once the kind of drawing is masked out and you have enough construction lines, then you can take a micron pen or any ink liner and go over everything and add detail as necessary. So I could have drawn the rest of this in pencil, but I think makes more sense to just add the details in ink at this point. And there's still a lot to be done. After the ink, you can stipple, you can hatch to create textures, but the idea here is just getting it down on paper quickly and effectively. And I like to, the same thing with construction lines by pencil, right? You start with something thin line and then add line weights as you go. So I could start with more thin line weight and then go to something heavier, like something like that. So there's various widths for some of these. So this is 0.1, and I can use this for just going over some of these and realizing actually that line doesn't exist in this drawing because it's covered by furniture. So just be careful with what you're drawing over here. So constantly refer back to the image, look back at what you're actually drawing. Okay, so that's the method that I'm going to use, and I'll just keep adding detail to this, trying to get this as perspectively accurate as possible. All right, so that's the method, and I think that's kind of enough to get started in sketching. And again, the advice that I would give is the more you draw, the better your hand-eye coordination will get, and the more your brain will be used to drawing what you see and not what you think you see.